Well, let me begin by framing the who behind Wilson Strategic Enterprises, or WiSE. I'm Dr. Isaiah Ike Wilson III, a soldier scholar by original formation, strategist by long profession, and a founder who believes deeply in the power of transitions, not just surviving them, but anticipating and mastering them as levers of transformation. Wilson Wise Consulting is a service-disabled, veteran-owned business enterprise born from over 3 decades of strategic leadership across combat zones, command suites, and classrooms. From Baghdad to Brussels, Kabul to West Point, and now from the battlefields into the boardrooms and policy chambers where today's compound security dilemmas demand new thinking. Actually, let me really begin with something more personal and professional, because for me, this work has never been abstract. WISE wasn't born from just a business plan. It was forged in a moment of rupture. When I stood at the intersection of war and transition, watching promising leaders falter not because they lacked courage or intellect, but because the systems designed to support them were too slow, they were too siloed, and they were too reactive. That moment happened on a dusty airfield outside Mosul, Iraq, as the Multinational Division North, or MND North, war planner, transitioning security authority to our U.S. replacement and Iraqi partners. The operation had succeeded tactically, but the aftermath was frankly chaos. No synchronized plan for civic governance, no integration with economic revitalization, no diplomatic bridge building, no commercial leverage to anchor stability. I watched an opportunity for sustainable peace collapse under the weight of stovepipe strategy. It was then that I realized we don't have a warfighting problem. We have a winning the peace problem, a transition problem. And that's really where WISE began, as a personal calling to help leaders bridge the liminal space between conflict and peace, between legacy institutions and next generation resilience. And from that day forward, my mission became clear. Equip today's and tomorrow's leaders to not just react to complexity, but to shape it ethically, anticipatorily, and systemically. That's what WISE does, and that's why we exist. WISE is a boutique firm with a global footprint, delivering managed transitions services through proprietary tools and practices to include, but not limited to, Tech3 integration, which weaves together disruptive technology, human leader operator talent teaming, and tactics, techniques, and procedures. Transitions Next, a model for governance and institution adaptation in times of upheaval. And 3D plus C campaigning, which speaks to integrating defense, diplomacy, and development and commercial activities, operations, and investments for hybrid statecraft. You can think of us as compound security architects who build the connective tissue between complex problems and sustainable solutions. Why do we do what we do? Simply because compound competition has become the new normal. Now, let me explain briefly what I mean by compound security. Compound security refers to the new reality where threats no longer operate in silos. They converge, reinforce, and amplify each other across domains like climate, cyber, economic volatility, and armed conflict. Where traditional security threat risks are discrete events like a flood, a cyber attack, or a coup, compound security reveals how these events interact, triggering cascading crises that overwhelm isolated responses. This is not just complexity, it is compoundness. Threats behaving in super additive, unpredictable ways that demand integrated, anticipatory strategy. This is why WISE exists, to help leaders detect these intersections early and act decisively before the crises converge. Now, let me give you a couple of illustrative case vignettes, very quick, short stories. The first is one we should be very familiar with because it's a future story, but the future is now. And let's call it maritime choke points in compound crises. The case, the Red Sea, winter 2024 to 2025. Let's imagine this. Commercial shipping lanes in the Red Sea are disrupted, not by one actor, but by the convergence of multiple threat vectors. Cyber attacks knock out satellite navigation for civilian vessels. Houthi proxy forces, backed by Iran, launch drone strikes from Yemeni territory. A climate-driven food shortage fuels political unrest in Egypt and Sudan. Simultaneously, a global financial downturn triggers rapid divestment from emerging markets, exposing port cities like Djibouti and Aden to economic collapse. Now, none of these are isolated risks, but together they form a compound threat, a maritime chokehold that disrupts global trade, destabilizes regional alliances, and requires not just naval deterrence, but humanitarian aid, cyber remediation, economic stabilization, and diplomatic coordination. Now, traditional security posture would respond domain by domain. WiSE responds compoundly with 3D plus C integration, risk convergence mapping, and pre-positioned foresight. That's what makes our model different. We don't just see the threat, we see how threats stack, how they spread, and how they spiral. And we act at the intersection because that's where the future breaks. It's also where it gets built. Second vignette. Now, this one causes us to stretch our imagination a little bit further out. Let's call this compound geoeconomic fallout in a post-alliance America. What's the case? Early 2026. The financial political shockwave of U.S. strategic retrenchment. What if? Following the inauguration of President Trump's second administration, the United States executes a rapid strategic realignment under a reinvigorated America First doctrine. This reorientation involves a withdrawal from select NATO operational frameworks, not NATO itself, but some of its operational frameworks, suspension of U.S. funding to multilateral institutions, aggressive tariffs on both the European Union and Canadian imports, as well as new bilateral pacts favoring authoritarian and energy-dominant regimes. Initially framed as economic nationalism, the policy shift triggers super additive instability across at least three fronts. First, financial markets react swiftly. Eurobond spreads spike as Europe anticipates a vacuum in transatlantic defense. Investment portfolios across Canada, Germany, and France reallocate from defense tech to energy resilience and industrial redundancy, causing volatility in transatlantic equities and sovereign bond markets. Second, political transitions accelerate abroad. In Germany, France, Mexico, nationalist backlash movements attempt to seize that moment, but end up failing to resonate with electorates fearing American unpredictability. In response, a new generation of pragmatic centralist coalitions rise, eager to build post-American alliance infrastructure. And imagine, thirdly, alliance systems reconfigure. The European Union, Mexico, and Canada, joined by Australia, Japan, and emerging leaders in sub-Saharan Africa and South America, let's say and foresee that they might launch something that we might call a Strategic Global Commons Compact, a multilateral pact prioritizing digital resilience, shared infrastructure investment, and joint deterrence around climate, cyber, and maritime corridors. NATO evolves into a European-led defense cooperative, while supply chains decouple from US-centric risk zones. Now, this is not just balance of power behavior. It's compound threat management by alliance innovation. Had these states relied solely on traditional deterrence models or clung to US assurance, they would have faced cascading economic decline and asymmetric exposure. Instead, they hedged, diversified, and bandwagoned together, using compound security principles to preempt disorder as well as to overmatch systemic uncertainty. Let's continue to imagine WiSE on the ground with several of these partners, advising ministries of defense, national development banks, and resilience task forces to help design this hedge posture informed by our compound security competition framework and powered by StormWiSE foresight analytics, which I'll speak to in a moment. This is why we do what we do. In this case scenario, this imagined case scenario, not just to anticipate threats, but to design the alliances that prevent them from metastasizing into global shocks. In summary, geopolitical friction, cyber instability, climate displacement, misinformation warfare, these are no longer isolated threats. They converge. And when they do, they overwhelm traditional stovepipe responses. WiSE was created to anticipate these convergences, to foresee and to forecast, not just to react.